Entity is a person, a place, an object, an event, or a concept. Automata. Entity type. A collection of entities that share common properties or characteristics. Our example here is a vehicle. Entity instance. A single occurrence of an entity type. Toyota Camry. Strong entity type. An entity that exists independently of other entity types. Student can logically exist without an advisor. That's right. Weak entity type. An entity type whose existence depends on some other entity type. A vehicle cannot exist without a related automata. So you see we have foreign keys and primary key from manufacturer should be in the table of vehicle. Attributes. Attributes is a property or characteristic of an entity or relationship type. That's of interest to the organization. Attributes should be named in a singular noun or noun phrase and should be unique. For example, manufacturer, description, engine type are attributes of automata entity type. We have a different type of attribute. The first one is required attribute. Is an attribute that must have a value. An optional attribute. An attribute that may not have a value. For look at the example. For entity type, a required attribute and descriptions is optional attribute. And another attribute type is composite attribute. An attribute that has meaningful component parts. For example, birth date is combined by day, month, and year attribute. Symbol attribute. An attribute that cannot be broken down into smaller components that are meaningful to the organization. Example, first name, last name. Multi-value attribute. An attribute that may take one more than one value for a given. Example, a customer can have multiple phone numbers, emails, and so on. Derived attribute. An attribute whose value can be calculated from related attribute values. Example, age and its value is derived from the stored attribute date of birth. Identify attribute and require attribute whose value must be unique, no change. Example, vehicle ID, owner ID. Composite identifier. An identifier that consists of composite attributes. Example, insurance ID is combined by insurance number and birth date. Relationship type. Relationship type is the meaningful association between or among entity types. Relationship instance is an association between or among entity instances where each relationship instance associated exactly one entity instance from each participating entity type. Degrees of a relationship. The number of entity types that participate in that relationship. There are three kinds of degrees of relationship. The first one is unary relationship. Is a relationship between instances of a single entity type. The second one is binary relationship. A relationship between the instances of two entity types. The last one is ternary relationship. A relationship among the instances of three entity types. For here, add a picture for illustrated for each of the degree of relationship. Cardinality constraints. So what's a cardinality constraint? Cardinality constraints are a rule that specify the number of instances of one entity that can or must be associated with each instance of another entity. We had two kinds of cardinality. The first one is minimum cardinality. If zero, then we have optional. If maximum cardinality is the maximum number. So we can see the example. Student, we have minimum and maximum number one. And a certificate, we have optional 0 and many. From certificate and course, we have many and optional 0 for certificate. And we have maximum equal 1 and minimum equal 1 for course. Associated entity. An entity type that associates the instances of one or more entity types and contain attributes that are peculiar to the relationship between those entity instances. 4 conditions required for associated entity. Number 1, all relationships for the associative entity should be many. Number 2, the associative entity could have meaning independent of the other entities. Number 3, the associative entity preferably has a unique identifier and should also have other attributes. Number 4, The associative entity may participate in other relationships other than the entity of the associated relationship.